All right, everybody, thanks for joining in. This episode, we are taking a step back to, well, like 3 days ago, because we're talking about a brand new movie this episode, and we are sort of breaking from the norm from here. We've talked about straight up non-horror movies in the past. For example, we've covered every one of the new Star Wars movies since those started coming out. We did Strange Brew. I was trying to think if we've done any other non-horror, strictly non-horror.
Done a few cartoons here and there.
But anyway, this episode we're diving into a movie that is close to me and Mark's hearts. This talks about, again, that goes back to the 80s for us, back to our prime, and we're talking about a movie that talks about a band that was a favorite of both of ours, I think at different points in our lives, but either way, we're talking about the brand new 1990. The brand new 1990, I think I'm turning into you. The brand new 2019 movie.
There you go.
The Dirt.
Oh, man. Yeah, I've been waiting for this film for a long time. I remember when the book came out back in 2001, I picked up a hard copy version of it, and I read that religiously. I think I probably read the whole thing like at least 10 times, and just kind of, because I have always been a huge Motley Crue fan. I think I got into them sort of later in their career, back when Dr. Feelgood came out. So it was probably 89, 90. And I remember just being at home, and it was summertime. And I think it was the summer before 8th grade. So this is how long ago this was. And they would do this thing on MTV where they would do like a whole week of one artist. So you like had Madonna week or Duran Duran week or whatever. And then it just so happened that it was Motley Crue week. And I had kind of been aware of them at that time, you know. I was more into like Iron Maiden and Metallica and things like that. But I never was a Motley Crue fan. And then during this week, I started playing their videos all the time. And it just, something about them hooked me. And I just all of a sudden was like a huge fan. And it's like really to this day, I've followed their career ever since then, and, you know, got all their albums, and I've seen them 3 times live. And, you know, to be honest with you, if it wasn't for them, I don't think I would have learned to play guitar, because it was after watching or getting into them, I was like, you know, I really want to start a band. And shortly thereafter, I did start a band and learned how to play guitar and all that stuff. And yeah, so again, my love for the band goes way back.
So maybe I wasn't too far off, because I don't know if you remember, I was the same as you. I was into like Iron Maiden, Metallica and stuff. And then I went through this phase right around that late 80s, early 90s era where like a particular album would come out, and then I would be like, oh, these guys are great. But I would like hyper focus like on that one album. 1989 came around, and Dr. Feelgood came out, and I fell in love with that album. And like Motley Crue was like the shit for me for a couple of years, actually, until For Unlawful Carnal Knowledge came out a couple of years later. But yeah, Motley Crue was like, that was where it was at, man. That album, Dr. Feelgood. Actually, I was just talking about this earlier today, that personally to me, that album is probably one of the top 10 albums of all time.
I see Motley Crue kind of as the way I see it's so crazy. All right, so here's a good example. Probably my two favorite bands are Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses. Those are the two top ones for me if I really dig into it. Guns N' Roses have like the best album ever. Like, to me, like Appetite for Destruction just kills it when it comes to rock and roll. There's nothing better. It's just never. It's like the number one album for me. and it's a classic. And like almost every song, I think maybe there's one song that I'm like kind of like mixed on, but the rest of them, I love the entire album. So, and then Motley Crue is more of like one of those bands where every album I like 2 or 3 songs, but then there's a lot of stuff I don't like. So in a strange way, we've said this before, like we talk about the horror franchises, and I'll kind of explain this. Like, so Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction is kind of like John Carpenter's Halloween for me. It's like a flawless piece of art.
You just had to get it in there.
I had to. It's a flawless piece of art, and then everything else that followed is very flawed. Like, you know, so all the sequels to Halloween are flawed, and then all of the follow-up albums to Appetite for Destruction is flawed. Now with Motley Crue, they're more kind of like Friday the 13th to me, where like there's no really great album in my opinion of all their stuff. I like pretty much like 2 or 3 songs, like I said, from every album. Even going to the more recent 2007 release, Saints of Los Angeles, which I was really impressed with. They kind of fall in like just like Friday the 13th. There's no classic Friday the 13th film where I'm like, this is like a masterpiece film. Like they're all kind of flawed, but like each one has its own charm and it has its parts in it that you like. I like. So that's kind of how I would compare it.
Yeah, I just remember, man, Dr. Feelgood came out, and then that following summer, I went and saw Motley Crue play at Alpine Valley. I think they were some part of some sort of like festival thing. A guy that, well, he's no longer my uncle, but he was my uncle at the time. But then him and my aunt got divorced shortly after that. Actually, he took me. I was 13 years old. He was feeding me beer all night, and we snuck. It was at Alpine Valley, and we had like lawn seats. And I don't remember exactly how it all worked out, but we snuck down into like the covered seat part of the thing, and we ended up like in third row for a couple of songs.
Wow.
And even in those days, like Tommy Lee was doing like the Cage like drum solo thing, and we got to see that like up close, and it was freaking cool as shit.
Yeah, I got to see them later. It was not their final tour, but the one right before that. I saw them at Carnival Sins tour in 2005, but then I saw them at the Crue Fest, the first Crue Fest. No, I'm sorry, the second Crue Fest. And then I saw them one more time in Milwaukee, and I got to see the Tommy Lee roller coaster drum set where he actually had a roller coaster track that went up in a loop. And he would do a drum solo where it would go. His drums were like literally on like wheels, and he'd go all the way up through this loop and loop around and then go back. It was really cool. And then again, then the final one he did was the Crucify, which was this. I didn't see this live, but it was the final tour. He did the roller coaster that literally goes from the stage all the way above the crowd, all the way to the back of the place. And yeah, that was pretty impressive. But yeah, I've been a huge fan of these guys forever. I read the book cover to cover in 2001, and it was because I followed these guys even like when nobody cared about them. I remember the day Vince got fired. I was watching Headbangers Ball, and like that guy, what was his name? Lon Friend. He was like the editor of Rip magazine, and he would like do these little spots on Headbangers Ball every once in a while. But there was like this, they kept saying this big giant Motley Crue news was coming up, and I remember thinking it was going to be like, oh, they're going to announce a new album or a world tour or whatever. And then finally, halfway through Headbangers Ball, he came on and said like that Vince got fired, that they're parting ways with him, and I was like, what? Because I just was completely blown away. And then shortly thereafter, it was like we rolled into the 90s. Grunge took over. All the 80s bands were just kind of floundering. And then I remember, they got John Corabi. And I think I was probably one of the only 5 people who bought the album with John Corabi singing. And I remember trying to like it and trying to get hyped about it because I was so desperate for I wanted a new Motley Crue album. And And then, they got the new singer, they changed their sound and it was heavier and they were trying to keep up with like the 90s era. And I remember just thinking, there's a couple of good songs here, but I would have much rather had a Vince album.
Yeah, I'd never heard that album until much later.
Oh yeah, I tried. I had it on cassette and CD, and I really tried to like it. And then finally, I kind of grew out of them at that point, and I just said, and I started getting into grunge and Nirvana and Alice in Chains and Stone Temple Pilots, all those guys. And then Motley Crue were just kind of a distant memory. But it's kind of funny because this was before the internet, and every time I would go to a grocery store or Walgreens or whatever, I would always, even though I wasn't like, going into the mid 90s, late 90s, I was married at that time. And I was kind of out, like I stopped sort of caring about the music scene and all that. I would still, though, however, every time I'd walk past the magazine aisle, if I saw like a Metal Edge or something, I'd pick it up and, oh, what's Motley Crue doing? And so I kind of always kept up with them. Like, they were always just like this band that no matter what stage of life I was in, I was always like kind of following what was going on. And I am a huge fan of the Saints of Los Angeles album, which I know some fans don't like, but I, for one, did think it was a pretty darn good follow-up, especially for later on in their career.
Maybe we should turn our focus to the actual topic of the episode.
Let's do it.
But yeah, the actual topic of this episode is not so much the band itself, which I think it's a good thing that we actually delve a little bit into our fandom with this particular movie, because I think with a lot of, especially, well, probably really any like music biopic films, you have to be a fan of the artist that is being covered somewhat, because if you're not, I think you're going to miss a lot of stuff. Or, for example, like this movie, I think because I watched this with my wife yesterday, and there was, well, I kind of wish I wouldn't have, but there was a lot of stuff outside of the offensive parts of the movie that, she just was like, huh? Wait, what? What's going on? And this is another really cool thing about like Motley Crue, which I think, while Guns N' Roses probably will probably try to play off of this a little bit, maybe at some point, but Motley Crue was this, band of brothers throughout the 80s, and then some stuff happened, and then they split up, but then they came back together, and I don't know if anybody else has ever done this before, to where they wrote a autobiography about the band, and all of the members of the band contributed to the same book. Because isn't that what happened with the book that this is based off of? That's what it was, right? Like, parts were written by, Nikki Sixx, parts were written by Tommy Lee, parts were written by Mick Mars, parts were written by Vince Neil. Yeah,
it was all, each chapter has like a, it's each member of the band. There's even a John Corabi chapter, the singer that was in for a couple of years.
Oh, okay.
And then the managers, I think there's a few chapters that they do. But yeah, it's and the book became this huge bestseller, and it was like became one of the more notorious rock and roll lifestyle books, ever written, to be honest with you. The movie actually does a really good job of following the book. I mean, it leaves a whole lot out, and it changes the timeline, especially towards the end. And there's a lot of things that, because you can't put obviously the full book into the movie, so they had to condense it a bit. They did keep a few things that I was wondering about how they would do it, namely the Ozzy scene, which was pretty hilarious. Because they've been like talking about making this into a movie for years. I mean, back in 2001, I think they were talking about, oh, we're gonna make this into a movie, and originally it was like they had a big movie company was gonna do it, and then there was all these different scripts floating around, and so finally it got made. But yeah, there's so many antics in the film that I think they did a pretty good job of like covering the basic levels of the book and then just putting it together for a 2-hour movie. one thing I was surprised about, and I know a lot of fans were, that they completely omitted all of the Tommy Lee Pamela Anderson stuff, which is a huge part of the book, because she ended up, you know, in the book, and you know, he talks about how, you know, their relationship, how they met, and how she kind of coerced him to quit the band. So he quit in the late 90s and went solo and did that. And then their relationship struggle, which ended up with him going to jail. And then, and she had, you know, they have 2 kids together, him and Pamela Anderson. And all of that was none of that was in the movie. They just basically talked about the Heather Locklear relationship in the film.
Yeah, I wonder if that, because the one like manager guy, like they kind of like were jokingly like, oh, he's not in the movie, but he's in the book.
Yeah.
So I wonder if like Pamela Anderson was like, nope, you're not using my name, you're not using my image at all in the movie.
Yeah, that could be. There might have been something like that, maybe because maybe she had some sort of issue with it. But I mean, then like you talk about the biggest thing for the 90s for Motley Crue, because I mean they were pretty much has-beens by the 90s, was the Pamela Anderson Tommy Lee sex tape, and none of that's in the movie, which was kind of.
I mean, I didn't read the book, but like I said, I know. I mean, at least most of the big stuff anyway. I was very familiar with it, because that was one of the things too when Heather Locklear's character was introduced in the film. I thought they did. That was probably one of the best casting choices they made for everybody, because that girl looked almost exactly like Heather Locklear looked back in those days.
That is too funny. Yeah, but they did a really good job with her.
When she came on, because I was like, oh, it's Heather Locklear, before they even said like, oh, hey, I'm Heather Locklear. I was like, ooh, I wonder who they got to play Pamela. And then like the movie ended, and I was like, oh, they didn't. She must have said no to that.
Yeah, and there's another chapter in the book too that they did not show, which was, and I know this is kind of like an off thing. They wouldn't have time to do that, but Motley Crue was partying with Iron Maiden, and Bruce Dickinson's girlfriend meets Nikki Sixx, and then they like kind of hit it off. And then later on in the day, Nikki Sixx is back at his hotel room, and Bruce Dickinson's girlfriend sneaks into the room with him, and they have sex. And then later on, he's wondering whether or not Bruce Dickinson ever figured it out or whatever. But so there's like a lot of things like that throughout the whole story, they don't really completely. There's little stories like that they don't show. Another big one was during the Girls tour, which was when they were at their worst, and that was right before Nikki ODing. They were in Japan, and then they were on a bullet train, and that was when they were at their worst with drugs. And right before because this was like that tour right before they had to sober up and all that. And Nikki threw a bottle, and it hit one of the passengers in the face, and it like caused a big issue, and they couldn't leave Japan and all that stuff. So some of that was cut out. But again, this is like this huge book, and you got to fit it into a hour and 40-minute Netflix film. And
like I said at the beginning too, it's definitely, if you haven't seen it yet and you're a fan of Motley Crue, go check it out. If you're 20 minutes into this episode and you're not a fan of Motley Crue, well, I guess more power to you, but I don't know if this movie would be really that entertaining for you, because it really does, like you said, it really kind of, they're all, the main characters like Tommy Lee and Vince Neil, they're like teenagers, and then all of a sudden like, oh, hey, here we're on this, Shout at the Devil tour, and then here we are, we're singing Kickstart My Heart and all, they don't really like, you have to kind of like, okay, so this was then, and this was now, and this was here, and this was then.
Right. Yeah, they push through it pretty quickly.
Yeah, they do. But there's like a lot of stuff in this movie that, again, if you were a fan of music at that time, you picked up on a lot of it. Some of the characters, they named who they were, but for example, you were talking about the Nikki Sixx OD scene. Who was laying on the couch in that scene? None other than the Slash. They didn't introduce him. They didn't, nobody said like, oh, hey, there's Slash or nothing. It's one of those things where they're like scanning through the crowd, and I'm like, that's Slash. And I knew he was there. I mean,
I heard Steven Adler was in a scene too. I missed it though. I went back and was reading about it. I'll have to go back and look for him.
you know, it's funny, but you say Steven Adler is the guy who played Vince Neil in this movie. He looked more like Steven Adler to me than he did Vince Neil.
I thought probably out of all four Motley Crue characters, I thought that Machine Gun Kelly or whatever his name is, who played Tommy Lee, did a good job. He had that. He really kind of, brought the Tommy Lee energy. Like the real hyper kind of drummer guy. I bought that pretty well. I thought the Nikki Sixx guy, the guy that played him, was a little bit too Hollywood looking. He looked a little too I don't know. Nikki Sixx was a little grungier than that. Not quite as sharp as that guy looked. And I think and the Vince guy looked okay, but for the, I think he overall captured the character pretty well, but there was something about him that I was a little off with him. And then the Mick character, I don't know if you've seen Mick Mars lately, but they really kind of toned down how bad his health is, because Mick, and they kind of talk about it in the movie, has a disease that basically has turned his spine into cement, and he can't move anything. He's literally hunched back. His face faces the ground, and he can't move his head up anymore because of this disease. And there's a lot of his joints have kind of sealed shut, so he basically can just stand and look down and play the guitar. His hands are still mobile, but he's also lost part of his vocal cord because of the disease, so he can't really talk very loud. I feel bad for the guy, because he's there's been a lot of, his health has really deteriorated.
That leads to the whole mystery of Mick Mars, and how old is the guy? Nobody knows.
He is about 10 years older than the rest of the band. So they're all probably pushing 60, and he's probably pushing 70 about now.
Yeah, that's the thing, too, because if you look it up, there's conflicting stories about when Mick Mars was actually born. Was he born, in the mid-50s, or was he born, in the early 50s, or was he born in the late 40s, or... But it's crazy when you think about that. Like Nikki Sixx was born in 58. So that means he's
crazy.
Almost 61 years old.
That's crazy. And he's actually trying to have a kid right now.
Ugh.
Yeah, it's weird, man. They're all old men now. And Tommy Lee's got to be just a year or two younger than that.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and same thing with Vince Neil, they're all... That's what's funny with that is... Because your parents are a couple years older than my parents, but my parents are right around in that same 61, 62 age range. And anytime I see stuff like this, when you look at these guys or, any of the guys really from back in the day, Metallica, Maiden, or even if you look at Zeppelin and those guys, and those guys are way older.
Oh,
but,
yeah.
I look at those guys, and then I look at my dad. I'm like, wait, what? How was that guy the same age as my dad? It's
Mick Mars is probably the same age as my parents.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
You're right.
Well, your mom and dad were in a band at one point, though, so it's a little easier for you to
swallow it all. Sure.
But even that, could you ever imagine your mom and dad rocking out at a Motley Crue concert with you?
That's funny you say that, because that Alpine show that you were talking about, a week before that, I went to my very first concert with my parents, and they took me to see Heart, and it was because they wanted to see Heart. Heart's okay. I don't have an issue with them, but at 13, 14 years old, I didn't really want to see them. But anyhow, went to go see them with them, and before the opening act started, the announcer came up and said, "Next week, Motley Crue!" And I remember thinking, oh man, that's the show I want to see. But so that was probably actually the show you were at.
Yeah, probably. Yeah, I can't remember what it was. It was like Gods of Guitar or something, because there was a whole. But it was like an all day thing. But like Motley Crue was the big headliner.
Because I know they played like for their Dr. Feelgood tour. They were at Alpine Valley.
Yeah, that's what it would have been. But I mean, I don't know if it was part of the Dr. Feelgood tour, but it was that next summer because I was like 13, 14 years old, and it was
Interesting.
Yeah. Good times.
We're old now.
Or maybe it was. No, it wouldn't have been because, yeah, it would have had to been the next year, right? It would have had to been 1990 because unless they wouldn't have went on tour before. No, because I wouldn't have been like a huge fan because I wasn't a huge fan until Dr. Feelgood came out, and then I was like, these guys are the best.
They're still one of those bands that I don't know, I follow just because, I don't know, they're like a childhood connection there, I guess. You know, it's been one of those things where I'm always sort of, oh, okay, well, they got the movie finally came out, and I was pretty stoked about this movie. I was looking forward to it for a while. And I think they did a good job, for the most part, capturing everything. It does have that, it's a little light, you know, and I know, like, it's a Netflix film. It could have probably been a little darker because, you know, some of the storylines, some of the things going on probably could have, because they really kind of try to keep it more in the comic, you know, comedy type Jackass. It's the director of Jackass who did this, and you can kind of tell it's sort of like that. Let's just focus on all the extreme antics of the band and, you know, like just a lot of shock value and that kind of thing. But I think, like, when you read the book, it's a little deeper than this. I mean, not a whole lot, but deeper to the point where you kind of connect more with some of the stuff going on in each one of their personal lives.
Well, I will say that I am glad that this came out after Bohemian Rhapsody came out, and that they didn't take the Bohemian Rhapsody route with it, which is one of the fears that I had with, you know, all of these. No, I shouldn't say all of these, because what you have, Bohemian Rhapsody, you have this Motley Crue one, you have the Elton John one coming out. I don't think there's any more that are really coming out, at least that have been announced anyway. But with the Bohemian Rhapsody one, I know it was a huge movie and stuff, and so many people were like, oh, that's so great. But they completely altered, like, everything with that movie and, you know, just made it this, like, feel-good movie. And you're like, oh, but, I mean, I'm not even a huge Queen fan, and I know that most of that stuff's not true. To where, at least with this one, even though it might have been watered down a little bit, at least it was 99% factual.
Right.
Because that's what I was wondering what they were going to do, like, when it got towards the end. Like, were they going to be, like, something, like, try to say, like, oh, or even, like, were they going to, like, because when they were like, oh, yeah, we're having such a good time, were they ever going to be like, oh, the band sort of kind of split up a little bit? I mean, they didn't really say split up, but, you know, with Vince leaving and stuff.
Well, yeah, they cut out a lot of stuff. Like when, you know, they got the new singer, and then they did the new album. The new album bombed, and they tried to keep going. And at that point, Elektra was like, you know, if you don't get your original singer back, then we're dropping you. So they ended up going back and getting Vince back for that reason. And then there was the whole letting go of the new singer and then getting Vince back and recording the album. And then that album bombed again. And, you know, this is like the late 90s, like 98, 99. And then they ended up getting dumped from Elektra. And Tommy Lee, at that point, like, Tommy Lee was kind of done with the band, and he left and started his own project while they got another drummer. They got Ozzy's old drummer, Randy Castillo, to fill in, and then they got Samantha Maloney, a female drummer I think she was from Hole. They had her for a while, so all that's, you know, dismissed, and that's not part of the, they don't show that. And actually, Tommy Lee, like, when he was kind of done with it, like, he just sort of, like, moved on at that point, and he didn't really want to do any more of this, and it wasn't until, like, 2003 or 4 they decided to get back together, and they kind of convinced Tommy that, hey, we can do this, you know, let's this might work. I think there's the fans are looking for this again. There's this go back and do it. And so they released a greatest hits album, Red, White, and Crew, and that actually made it platinum, which was crazy for its time because albums weren't doing that at the time. But it was just a greatest hits album, and then they went on the Carnival of Sins tour, and then they toured all the way from 2004 to 2015, and so it was like a 10-year run that they had, and then they finally did that final "we're not going to tour anymore," and they haven't played live since then, and now they just say that they're still active in terms of they'll record music from time to time, and with this movie, obviously with the soundtrack, but they say they're never going to tour again.
Yeah, I don't believe that though.
Well, Mick, if they do tour again, I don't know how much more time Mick has. He's going to be able to do it because he is in rough
right
shape.
I wonder if does he have any kids or anything that play guitar, because I could see that, like what Led Zeppelin did that, where they were touring with Bonham's kid and stuff. Not touring, but playing shows and stuff.
He has kids, but there's a lot of drama there from what I've read.
Oh, he has kids from tours? No.
Yeah, pretty much. But actually, the thing that's kind of funny is the guy DJ Ashba. He's a guitar player. He's played with Nikki Sixx in his side project 6 a.m. And he was also Axl's guitarist prior to the reunion with Slash. And there's a lot of controversy that he's kind of the guy behind the scenes who has helped write a lot of the later songs with the band, because the last album, Saints of Los Angeles, it's kind of one of those albums where the reality is probably not the whole band. They probably didn't really play on the whole thing together. There was probably a lot of ghost musicians on there and ghost writers and all that stuff. But he's the one, I think, if something ever does happen to Mick, he's probably going to be the guy they call if they ever do decide to go on tour and whatnot, because he seems to be the go-to guy for Nikki Sixx.
I definitely give The Dirt a big thumbs up. And the one thing that I will say, and this kind of goes back to, actually we had this conversation in my house yesterday when we were watching this. If you are going to watch this movie, be prepared for a lot of gratuitous nudity, because there is a lot.
I'm surprised Barbara Crampton isn't in this movie.
Well, I will say that there is nothing that rivals Barbara Crampton in this movie. But there
in her
is,
heyday.
Oh man, there is a lot of just hardcore sex scenes in this movie. Almost, I shouldn't say hardcore, because people are like, "Oh man, I watched that movie and there was no sex scenes." But I mean, but I was telling my wife though, I mean, they're just kind of keeping true to it, because that's the way it kind of was back in the day.
Yeah.
Was, oh, hey, we got some groupies before the show. Oh, I'm going to knock one out real quick before I go on stage. And the only thing, I don't know if, because I know that Def Leppard has all these stories back when, in their heyday. I would assume it was the truth with a lot of these bands. Maybe it wasn't, but, for example, when Tommy Lee's doing his drum solos and stuff for 10 minutes and stuff, the other guys aren't sneaking backstage real quick and getting one,
Yeah, there's a lot. If you read the book too, there's a lot more to it than there's one part in the book where Vince talks about how he had so many groupies he didn't know what to do with them. One time that he set up a sexual obstacle course where he literally lined everybody up and just kind of jumped from person to person to person to person. I mean, it's so they capture most of the craziness, but you read the book and it's 10 times even crazier.
Oh, man. Well, I know he mentioned something about the gangbang at one point.
Yeah, it could have been what he was talking about. Yeah, because he had
yeah, because there was the comment about when they were. It was actually right before the Ozzy thing.
Yeah, right.
And they're like, "Oh, Vince, how many have you had?" And he's like, 3. And they're like, "No, not today, on the tour." And he's like, "Oh, well, I stopped counting at the gangbang."
Yeah. Yeah, that's probably what they were referring to then. But I think the timeline would be off because it happened later on, but because it was during his sober time, because he didn't know what to do with himself. But anyhow, I agree with you. I'll have to give it a thumbs up. It's, it kind of really captures 80s rock and roll and that whole scene, that early 80s Sunset Strip Hollywood scene that brought bands like Motley Crue and Guns N' Roses to the forefront. And, it's gone. It's it doesn't exist anymore, but that was like kind of a fun time of rock and roll. And then, then we went into the 90s and it got a little darker and a little grungier, as you could say. But yeah, definitely if you're a fan of 80s rock, this is a movie you got to see. All right. Well, this is the song "The Dirt," and it's recorded and it's for the new soundtrack. And I hope you all enjoy it because this is new Motley Crue 2019.